Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. Once again, it looks like all the questions are on Patreon, which makes sense because the most subscribers are on Patreon. I just wanted to give a quick and friendly reminder that anyone who supports is eligible for these. So I think the majority of people just support and listen, which is totally cool, by the way. Don't feel like you ever have to participate. I wanted to remind everybody that this isn't a Patreon-only thing. This is for everybody. And I'm really trying to do more things that are only supporter focused. And in fact, I just shot the room tour finally, which I've been promising. So hopefully that'll be up tonight or tomorrow, depending how long it takes YouTube to render in 4K. But anyway, let's jump right in and get right to it. All right, let's start with the newest questions first this week. First up is Paul Ramos. He has two questions. I finally decided to liquidate my Dreamcast games for a USB GD-ROM. I hear the compatibility and availability is better than the GDEMU. What mods should I be doing besides battery and fan replacements? I see from time to time removing one of the power regulators, but I don't know why. So, liquidating your Dreamcast games for a USB GD-ROM, I mean, it's your decision, but I certainly would never do that. The only time I've ever sold off a collection is because I had to. You know, I love all of the optical drive emulators, ROM carts, and all that stuff, but I do love owning all of the original games. It's just my preference, you know, do whatever you'd like, but I'd certainly consider keeping a very cool collection if you have one, and also getting one of those. And in fact, while Dreamcasts are still kind of inexpensive, I would consider picking up a Dreamcast that's in good condition and leaving it completely stock with that collection, and then doing a completely modded one and maybe even add the DC HDMI to it. But anyway, to answer your questions, first, regarding USB GD-ROM to GDEMU, Darkstar7 chimed in. I like the GDEMU. I don't have any problems with it. If you load up a lot of games without configuring the INI file, it takes forever to load. But if you know how to configure the INI file, or if you could find a pack that somebody had already put together, then it loads instantly and works fine. So, I mean, do whichever you'd like. With GDEMUs available on Amazon these days with free Prime shipping, it seems like the better choice to me. But whatever. I certainly don't hear anything bad about USB GD-ROMs. And as far as the other stuff, I mean, I do have that Dreamcast video that goes into pretty great detail about all those things. So rather than rehash it here, maybe give that one a shot. But just to address the direct question of removing one of the power regulators, it's basically because if there's no load on it, it gets hot. Now, it probably doesn't get too hot enough to do any damage. It probably will be fine. But if you just simply remove that regulator, nothing gets hot and you don't lose anything. So while a lot of people seem to be criticizing that method, not one person has ever given any evidence that removing the power regulator could do anything wrong to that console at all. Not one. I think somebody said the karaoke unit won't work, but I already addressed that in the video. So whereas if you leave it in and if it gets hot enough, that could be a negative side. So I just take it out and save it in case you ever need to put it back in, but I just I can't think of any negative reason for doing so. And everything else, you know, I'm sorry to just answer you by telling you to go watch a video, but I spent like 50 hours getting that video together and it answers every other one of your questions. So probably best to get the info there. And unfortunately, I have the same answer to your second question. You recently got a new scope from Keysight. You said you've already watched some of the videos Steve and I did, but you didn't quite grasp it. Yeah, it took a while for me to grasp it too. And I had to rewatch the video with Steve and I like 3 times. And very often it was little things, not big things. So, you know, after using it for a month, you know, with space in between, I'm not using it every day. So I go back and I remember the bigger concepts, but I just forgot what button to push to get to the spot where I could adjust the thing that I did remember. So I would just start back with the very first oscilloscope video Steve and I did, because I tried to make it as basic of a sit-down, plug-in thing, and we only concentrate on sync, which is easier. So I would start with that one, and maybe well, I mean, you already have a good scope, so don't even bother with the OON video then. I would just kind of watch that one again and see. And if you have any suggestions on what I could do to improve that video and make it better, or maybe if anything else, let me know, because maybe I can go back and make like a quick 5-minute, like the quick Cliff Notes version of the oscilloscope video just for people that need a reference. But let me know. Next, Pat and Thompson said, building a new 4K gaming PC. I was looking at solutions for converting VGA to 240p and saw the arcade VGA card through Ultimate Arcade. What I would really like to do is use my 4K monitor for everyday use, but also have my PVM hooked up to the PC through the arcade VGA for when I want to play retro games. Is that possible? So I'm actually considering the exact same thing right now, because as people have heard my incessant whining and bitching about my PC not being able to do 4K, I think I'm subconsciously trying to psych myself up for dropping like thousands of dollars on a new rig to make sure I could do 4K processing better. And in doing so, while I should, in a perfect world, make it a rig that's just for video processing, I would like to be able to use that for other things. So whether I have different hard drives in there that I boot to different modes, like, all right, let's boot to the video editing hard drive, let's boot to the gaming drive, whatever else. I could do partitions, but drives are so cheap nowadays. I do want to do something similar to yours. And I'm also curious if any of those USB VGA cards could work as well. Because while most of them are complete junk, like before I even continue, most of those USB VGA video cards are junk. We are only pushing out 240p 15 kilohertz here. So maybe we could find one that can be forced into 240p mode and 60 frames per second. So I don't have an answer to your question, but it's something I might relatively soon. I would be completely okay with installing the arcade VGA or any other cards, but here's what you do need to know. If you're using this for MAME emulation, which is certainly going to be my focus because I would rather play the real consoles, and while I'd rather play the real arcade boards, that's impossible. So for me, when using MAME, the number one thing to remember is the faster the processor, the faster MAME runs. And MAME, at least as far as I knew up to a year and a half ago, MAME does not use any of the video card GPU processing for its emulation, which means if you have a cheap arcade VGA card, or if you have the latest, $2,500 video card, it won't make the slightest bit of a difference. Some people have a problem with the arcade VGAs because they're $100 and you could find used ones that you could force into that mode for cheaper. I don't have a single problem with it, but you might want to pay attention to that because in our scenario, it might be something where, because of how you force it, you would want to use that card as opposed to the arcade VGA. So it's a really tricky question, and I'm not sure the best way to answer it, but I will be looking into it. And once again, I would also love to find just a VGA output USB, even if it's USB 3, that's fine, that we could do 240p 60 frame per second on for this exact reason, so you don't have to worry about any internal solutions for emulation. So if anybody knows of anything, let me know, please. And if I figure anything out, I will absolutely follow up either in the Q&As or probably in the video, in a separate video itself, because it's something that makes a lot of sense to me, especially when I have plan on building one PC that does 4K capture and 240p capture and, everything that you've already talked about. So it's kind of an interesting question, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it. And also you asked if anyone had heard of the Ambry PC VGA to HD converter. I haven't seen that one specifically, but the one thing that you always need to know for all of these upscalers, do they process 240p as 480i, or do they process it as progressive, and how much lag does it add? So I don't know the answer to any of those, but maybe other people have used that one before and could chime in. Mr. Jeremiah Crabfeet asked if there is any disadvantage to leaving the G-SCART switch's sync regeneration feature on all the time. I don't think so. I don't think at all. I think, unlike in LM1881, there aren't really any negative effects, and even if you have a perfect signal coming from one console and one that could use some cleanup coming out of another, I think that perfect signal would just get redrawn exactly the same. So I'm going to give it a 99.9% that, yeah, absolutely. And while it's not unsafe to leave the old, the LM1881 sync strippers on all the time, it's something that I would recommend the opposite. So on the cheap ones that are built into the SCART heads, I would recommend you only turn it on if you need it, whereas with the G-SCART, I think you could just leave it on all the time and never have to worry about anything. Also, does it add any mathematical amount of lag of any kind? So when you're talking about sync, there's two kinds of lag. First and foremost, there will be no display latency. So it's not like lag from a flat screen or from a processor. Zero. But the other kind of lag when you're talking about a sync signal, if there's some kind of delay or latency, it might shift the image over by 1 pixel. And I don't think there is, but if there is, it's going to be less than using an LM1881. So, for example, if you used like any of the devices that use that sync stripper, the older one, and you turn it on and it moves all the way over here, if you were to use the new one and you turn it on, it would only shift over a hair as opposed to, a couple of pixels over. So overall, good questions, but I would confidently use the G-SCART switch and just and not really worry about any of those things. The only time, in fact, is if you were going into an oscilloscope to do some kind of very special testing. But if you're doing that anyway, you'd want to use the probes directly into a console, not into a G-SCART anyway. So that's kind of the only point. So a no-named subscriber asked why people would use the mini DIN connectors that we do over something like an RJ45 port for analog video signals. And the short version is to protect audio quality and video interference. The slightly longer version is that with all of these cables, if you have any kind of sync that's not just a clean C-sync signal, you'll definitely get interference on the video lines, most likely on the blue line. And there are a bunch of consoles where you have to use composite video as sync. So that kind of right there would turn a lot of people off. The audio, if you're running audio through it, you would definitely get some buzz. And I don't think you would want to put 5 volts through one of these cables either with the lack of shielding and everything that close together. So it's really all of those things combined. You could potentially work out if you were running your own cables and making all of your own cables. You could potentially use that to do longer runs and custom lengths and stuff like that. But if you were to do that, I would recommend only using RGBS and making sure you have C-Sync coming from every source going through those cables. Also, I think the reason none of the main cable manufacturers use it is because they went out of their way to try to get the best possible cabling out there rather than trying to make a solution work. So I think one of the cable sellers did used to use RJ45 way back in the day, and I think I found one of those cables recently, and it didn't last well at all. I mean, it was kind of coming apart, the thin traces were starting to break, so RJ45 is meant to be plugged in and kind of left alone, whereas these cables are a lot more durable. So, short version because of interference, longer version, everything I just kind of spewed out, but hopefully that puts it into a little more perspective. And if you're looking to do this project yourself to make your own cables and stuff like that, you also might want to look into other cable sources. I almost just interrupted myself because there's a very common scenario with IT nerds like myself where you just end up with a couple 100 feet of Cat6 cable and might as well just use it. I could totally see that scenario, but if you're really looking to make your own or to buy good cables, stick with what's been proven. Cables that are thick enough, durable enough, and especially because you're also buying from stores that have been selling cables for a long time now and have already worked out the bugs in a lot of these. Schwink had a couple of questions. First, they have an AV Famicom and they wonder if it's better to get it modded with a HiDef Nests or to get one of the retro USB AVS consoles that output 720p. Also, they want to know if you could play audio directly from the chip on expansion audio games with a HiDef Nests, or if you have to use its built-in replication of the expansion audio chips. So I'm pretty sure the HiDef Nests only uses its own audio replication. I don't know if Kevin ever implemented a pass-through option or if that could be done, but I'm pretty sure that's how the HiDef Nest works. As for your other question, that's 100% based on your setup and your needs. Getting your HiDef Nest modded by somebody else might cost the same as an AVS. Do you ever need to use analog at all anymore? If you do, you can't really use, I don't even think you could use composite video with a HiDef Nest installed. Whereas if you bought an AVS, you could just keep your AV Famicom as is. So it's, for me, answering that question would be functionality and use over features, because both would be excellent solutions. You don't get, you could only go up to 720p with the AVS, whereas the HiDef Nest goes up to 1080p. But that might not matter. If you're using a 4K TV, it's going to get scaled anyway, and 720p would be fine. So, also, if you're a fan of scanlines, they tend to look better run in 720p mode than 1080p, and let your TV do the scaling. So, overall, I would just kind of let your situation and your full setup dictate which one you get. But they're both great choices, so there's certainly no wrong choice. There might just be a better choice for your setup. The GOAT wants to know, what's the best option for adding an RGB port to a console after installing an RGB mod, like 3DO, Virtual Boy, etc.? I assume that you mean a console that doesn't already have an existing multi-out, like those consoles. And in that case, it is almost always my recommendation that the generic 8-pin mini DINs are the ones to use, because you could make sure that whatever signals on that DIN is proper video level signals, and you just buy basic pass-through cables. It also allows you to switch what kind of cable you use in the future, if you go from SCART to BNC to whatever else. I really like those. If you're going for a custom setup, so you have a very clear understanding of what's happening, you can use VGA style ports, which allow for things like those VGA to BNC cables. So if you're going direct into an RGB monitor or into an Extron crosspoint, that would be a great solution. The one and only complaint, well, I guess two complaints about a VGA port. One, it's not round, so it's a lot harder to cut the hole, whereas just a round 8-pin mini DIN, you just need a drill bit. But the other thing is, what happens when somebody else gets that console? Are they going to look at that VGA port and go, plug it into a VGA monitor and go, oh, this thing's broken, and throw it out? Or are they going to know that it's RGBS 240p 15 kilohertz only? So that's, looking forward, that's a much bigger concern than most people might think. Whereas an 8-pin mini DIN connector, it's kind of like, that forces you to do some Googling and figure out where this came from. The only other expert option is if you really understand video signals, you could use a Genesis 2 style connector, which means that you could also use any of your Genesis 2 cables and the HD RetroVision cables, officially not supported, of course. But the problem with that is twofold. First, now you're building this console mod to output an incorrect signal. So you're lucky in that if you just tell people, leave a note on it, make sure to use an official, well-built, properly built Genesis 2 cable, then you'll be fine. Go to Retro Access, go to Insurrection, go to Retro Gaming Cables, buy a Genesis 2, and you're done. But, you're really just doing an improper mod on something in that point. There's definitely a time and a place. I have friends working on projects that are using the Genesis connector for this reason, but they have a full grasp of what it is that they're doing, understand how this could go wrong and the ways it can go wrong, and I think there's even going to be notes on some of the PCBs that says, like, make sure to use a properly built Genesis 2 cable, not a pass-through cable or something. So that's the other side of it. But regardless if you use all three of those options, you could search for through OSH Park, and a bunch of people have breakout PCBs for all of those. So you install the connector, and then on the inside of the console, you slide over the PCB right on top of it. In fact, I think I have one for, VGA right here. It's probably not going to focus. There we go. So you just drop it over the back of a connector, solder the pins, and now there's some very nice and large pads that can be soldered to. So search OSH Park. Dan Citrus 3000 PSI has a bunch of them. Renee DB Electronics made one for the Genesis connector. So at the very least, all three of those choices would have a very easy way to connect them on the inside, so you don't have to solder those tiny little pins. Just keep in mind your use case and pick which of the three options that probably fits you best. I always lean towards 8-pin mini DIN with a pass-through cable, though. And I think I already said this, but both Retro Access and Retro Gaming Cables now sell high-quality mini DIN 8 pass-through SCART cables as well, so you don't even have to worry about making a custom cable from it. Solid Unit has a very dangerous question. Can anyone summarize all the mods needed for the AliExpress consoleized Neo Geo to make it safe to use with your equipment, i.e. an OSSC or G-SCART switch, stuff like that? So, yes, put it on an oscilloscope with the monitor test tool with an all-white screen and measure the voltage. Make sure dark bit is turned off, which if you're using the monitor test tool, it doesn't matter. All-white screen is exactly what you would need. And I think if you've installed a Unibios, you could probably use that white screen as well. And that will be the only thing that tells you if the video signal is safe. You'd also then need to test the audio signal to make sure that voltage won't blow it out. And who knows about the consistency of the AliExpress units. Maybe one seller went through the trouble of making sure everything's right. Maybe another one didn't. I'm sure there's multiple sellers selling the same case. I can't really talk about too much about upcoming solutions, but I will say that if you're not in a rush to get your MVS consoleized, wait just a few more months and you'll see some much better options out there. I actually like the case of the AliExpress MVS. I think that's kind of neat, but it's designed to be cheap, whereas the people that I know that are working on multiple projects have a much better goal in mind. There are some that are absolutely designed to be as inexpensive as possible while still being safe. But there's also a few that want to focus on this feature or focus on that feature. The Behar Brothers VGA one is one I've already talked about, so I can talk openly about that. But there's a few other things like that out there where if you have a little bit more time to hold on, and I hate telling people this because there's always delays, there's always the next big thing coming, but this is definitely one of those situations where if you're not in a rush, wait. Because I've seen so many junk consoleized MVSs sell for a lot more than they're worth. And that might only be $150, but it's still a piece of junk. Whereas on the other side of things, I've seen some beautiful ones sell for $500 or $600 that are, while the case is nice and there's nothing wrong with them, there's no reason they shouldn't be $200. So if you have time to wait, wait. If not, buy it and just put it on a scope or have somebody else test it and test that individual one just to be safe. And especially make sure that the sound is done correctly as well, because that could blow out a lot of things on top of the video signals. So it's I wish I had an easier answer for you, but that really is the only way to guarantee you're going to have a console that has a safe output. Here's a question from Matt Fritz. Sorry, Matt, the question's worded a little weird, so I'm not really sure what this is. I think you're getting a black bar with the Game Boy interface software when using a Sony PVM 2530. I think that's kind of what I gathered from the post. My apologies if I got that wrong, but I honestly wouldn't even know what you meant by a black bar. So I think the best thing to do would probably post pictures on the GC Forever thread that Extrems runs about the Game Boy interface software and see if anybody else is getting it. I guess you say the speedrun version doesn't have this issue, so it's got to be a setting then. But yeah, without a picture or a better description, I really wouldn't understand what you meant by black bar. Sorry. And lastly, RetroTech wanted to give a shout out and say if I'd ever like to discuss CRTs or PVMs, he'd love to help. Yeah, I would love to have more time to do more interviews and stuff like that. I'd certainly love to talk about your channel and the work that you've done, and anytime there's more info out there about these things, and especially coming from people that are trying their best to do a good job in restoring them, it's always a good thing. So yeah, I'd love to do something with you at some point. I just, I got to try to find the time to make it all happen. Hopefully by the end of the year, Retro RGB will have been, more contributors, more thinned out to different people, and then I'll kind of have time to go back and do a lot more awesome stuff and shine more light on other people in the community. And that's something that I really prided myself on, that a lot of the interviews I did with people that were never interviewed before and deserved to be. And I wish I had time to get back into that, because that was certainly one of my favorite things about the site. So, fingers crossed, hopefully everything's moving in the right direction and I could get back to doing the stuff that I think is a big help and a lot of fun too. So thanks. Yeah, I'll reach out to you as soon as I have extra time, and keep up your channel. I'm pretty sure I've seen a few of your videos before. So good work. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks to everybody who participates. I really enjoy doing these. And also, if you're new to these Q&As or you're new to being a supporter, any question at all that you have, just post wherever you found this video and post in the newest one. The way these things work, I can't go back and sift through the other videos. So any question at all, or if I missed yours from this week, please just go wherever it is that you're a supporter, find the latest Q&A video, and post your question there. These do go live about a month after they go out to supporters, but the comments are disabled. It really is just a courtesy that I make them live for everyone else. This is really just focused on the supporters and trying my best to say thank you back for your help. So, as always, thanks for participating, and I'll see you guys next time.